The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
All right, it's time for another 2023 episode of the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. This is Dave, your host and author. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, as usual, make sure to find us on social media. We are available at Florida Beer Blog on Instagram and Twitter. FL Beer Blog is on Facebook. And also search for the Florida Podcast Network, since we are a proud member of that particular robust organization. You can find them on Instagram and Facebook as well. Web pages are pretty simple. It's FloridaBeerBlog.com. The direct feed for the show is FloridaBeerPodcast.com. And obviously that is going to be a part of FloridaPodcastNetwork.com, all of which you can find very easily. So today we are going to be heading back up to Pensacola to Alga Beer Company. They've been on the show a couple of times, been very, very happy to bring them on. And they released information January 1st, actually, for a brand new project they have going into the building next door. It's called the Florida Room. And if you needed a little bit of mixed cocktail, South Beach, mid-80s neon colored spandex sort of craziness in Pensacola, well, you got it coming to you this year. We're going to talk to Brett Reid. He is the co-founder and brewer at Alga Beer Company, the man with the beard that should be feared. And I want to talk to him a little bit about the company first. Obviously, the brewery's been doing really, really well in a really good market, and they have been able to grow and really sort of not only cement who they are and what they do, but also help the people in Pensacola discover some really awesome beers. And then we're going to get some details on the Florida Room. It is not open yet. They are still in the middle of construction. Hopefully it's going to be open pretty soon, but we will get the full details on what that's going to be like from him, from the person itself, Brett Reid from Alga Beer Company, talking about the Florida Room on Florida Beer Podcast. Crack whatever beverage you're going to crack and enjoy. Since we have last spoken, it seems like Alga has really not just grown in terms of who you are as an entity, but kind of ingratiated yourself into a very appreciative, shall we say, craft beer market in Pensacola. Is that kind of safe to assume?
Yeah, I mean, we're making craft beer drinkers out of, people that were previously Michelob Ultra, Miller Lite, just macro lager fanatics. We're kind of opening their eyes to, how craft beer could be enjoyable by, their standards per se. So I think that's due in large part to, a collective effort from all the breweries here in Pensacola, not just us.
And it seems to be that your market really tends to be less about the state of Florida and more your traditional moniker of LA, Lower Alabama. Do you get a lot of visitors coming from that area, or is it still mostly locals? Or are you getting a lot of people that are coming up from the rest of the state where we are?
Really and truly, we get a ton of people that are just coming from actually out of the state, not necessarily Alabama. We're the closest brewery to the airport here in Pensacola. So we see people from Wisconsin, Tennessee, Texas, Louisiana, people that are coming to the beach. Mm-hmm. We attract them because we're our hours are, we open at 11 a.m. every day. So, we're the first place they see open. We're the closest one to the airport. So most of them always just stop by here first, have a beer before they can go check into their hotel. So we see, people from all over. It's not just from our area or from even just the state, which is, kind of wild in and of itself.
And it was kind of interesting especially when I talked to breweries that are in Southwest Florida. This is their season right now because this is when all of the snowbirds tend to be down. What is it like for you up in the Panhandle? Because I would assume that you're more of a traditional spring and summer sort of place.
Yeah, I mean, we do, kind of experience a lull in the winter. I'm not ashamed to admit it that, business can be slow, but we try and make it appealing for people to stop in still. Like, I think we have the benefit specific where we're at because we're in a neighborhood and, people live in this neighborhood. We've got several thousand houses within a walking distance of the brewery. So, while it's not summertime numbers by any means, we are still doing very well. And I think we're, like I said, we benefit from being in the neighborhood.
That's kind of awesome. In terms of the styles, because I guess talk to me about the styles, because you've been making a massive breadth of beers since you opened. Some things that I guess I wasn't totally expecting to see from a Panhandle brewery. Have you been able to really start to branch out and make stuff that is, different even for what you had anticipated before opening?
Yes and no. So, going into it, we knew that we wanted to focus on making classic style beer the best way we could. And, to that, we wanted to be able to make our interpretation of classic style beer. And with that, we've been able to kind of branch out from there a little bit more. So one of our core beers is a honey saison. So after that, you kind of branch out from there a little bit. We've been able to make one of our favorite beers that we've made has been a beer called Better South. It's a smoked farmhouse lager. So
interesting.
We kind of take some things that people are somewhat accustomed to or somewhat familiar with, and then we, get to experiment a little bit, and that kind of makes it more fun for us, and it keeps things interesting. Beyond that, we're starting to branch out into, we've always made sour beer, but now we're kind of moving towards like the super fruited gluten-free sour to give people that can't enjoy one of our sour beers because of the wheat component. We can now give them a quote unquote beer that they can drink and, not have to worry about any sort of allergy or anything like that. One thing that we have been able to do, and one thing that we're, I like to think we're making people more of a fan of in our Panhandle town, is we're making people into year-round imperial stout drinkers, which is something that I didn't think would be possible. But obviously, you look at breweries like Cycle and Angry Chair, like they can do it in a warmer climate than what we're in. So
yeah,
why wouldn't it work? So we go really wild into those imperial stouts, and we make basically pastry stouts and dessert stouts. And when it comes down to it, like people want to just drink something that tastes good, and it doesn't matter what the season is. And that's kind of where we benefit, is because, we've got people that have expanded their palates and they want to try the next thing that we make. And, we have the liberty of being able to, make smaller batches with our, newly acquired 2-barrel system. So
that's awesome.
We're very fortunate to be able to play with ingredients as much as we do.
Yeah, I will say I find it interesting that your smoked beer is as popular as it is, since that seems to be, I guess, the pariah of the craft beer community. It's something that brewers love to make, but every brewer that I've spoken to says they put it on tap and it just stays there. Yeah,
I think us incorporating it into a style that people are more familiar with, I think makes the sell a little easier. We say farmhouse lager, people are like, oh, I know one of those 2 words. So sure, I'll try it. And then that's always been something that we've tried to do, is to, like, when we first opened, we didn't call our honey saison a saison. We called it neighborhood beer. And then People immediately gravitate towards that because, we're in a neighborhood. These people live in the neighborhood. They're walking to the brewery. They want the neighborhood beer. Then, egg on their face, it's a Saison after they've just told us that they don't like Saisons, but they like this one. So it's,
Gotcha.
I'm really, just in case my dad's listening to this, I definitely am putting my degree to work. So your money is not going to waste.
And I know one thing that you and I have chatted about, in DMs and whatnot, and it's something that I think is interesting, is the label art for a lot of cans that you're releasing. Because that's something, if I'm correct, you do in-house, correct?
Yes, I am. Me and our taproom manager do all of the art that we use in the brewery. I do a majority of it. And then, if there's something that I feel like Nate has more of a knack for, if there's a certain style that I have in my head that I feel like Nate can achieve better than I can, I'll pass that off to him. And he, has full creative control over it within the parameters that I've given him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, a beer we released last week, the Seagull Food Hazy IPA. It's a collaboration with the food truck that we have parked out back. Name came from just a stupid conversation the food truck guys were having, and it started out with, let's put a seagull on it, or let's brew a beer with French fries, because why the hell not? And then it turns into Nate draw a seagull with its mouth stuffed full of French fries inside of a brown paper bag. And, a couple of days later, I have like exactly what the image was in my head. And then we send it off for print, and it comes back and we all cackle for 30 minutes because it's the funniest thing we've seen in a while. So
I almost hate to ask this question, but have you had it to where the label pops in your head first and you sort of have to design a beer around what you want that label to look like?
100%. Like, yeah, I mean, we have different ideas. A couple months ago, we did a whole series of sour beers that were all based off of quotes from the movie Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
Okay.
So I had a bunch of ideas for names for beers and created a bunch of labels, and then sent it all, or I was getting ready to send it off to print. And I was like, oh shit, we don't even have these beers made yet. We got to figure out how this is going to work. So yeah, there are times where we do put the proverbial cart before the horse, but I like to think we're good enough at our job to where we can kind of figure that out.
Gotcha. Well, sometimes you do that, and sometimes you do some pretty big planning, which brings me to the topic of the Florida room, which I am definitely intrigued by. I guess at a high level, what is the Florida room going to be?
So in a nutshell, and just as basic as I can put it, it's going to be a 80s themed seltzer cocktail bar located next door to the brewery.
Okay. Yeah, and definitely with some of the imagery that you put on social media, it's very Miami Vice. It's very stereotypically Miami Beach 80s sort of things. Like, does that play in Pensacola?
I would like to think so.
Okay.
all of the feedback that we've gotten on it so far has been, for the most part, positive. I mean, there's some people that don't understand how we can use seltzer as a cocktail, but that's the least of my worries, because like, we have the ability, we have the space. Why not just go full like Disney Imagineer with it and turn it into something like a transformative experience for anybody?
But I guess as long as I've known you, you've been making the beer, and this has sort of been what you've been looking for was Alga. Why not just take that and increase either your brewing size even more or make a larger tap room? What was it about the craft cocktail and seltzer experience that made you want to make this a new separate entity?
I think it really comes down to giving options for everyone that comes to the brewery, because there's sometimes that we have a group comes in and like 3 out of the 6 people want beer, and then the rest of them just don't have a palate for beer, just don't want beer. And then they have to settle for a glass of wine or a cider, or, in some cases, something non-alcoholic. And that's not fun for that person. Like, they don't, I want everybody to come to our facility and be able to have something that they fully enjoy, and, so much so that it makes them want to come back. And I think broadening our reach and broadening our portfolio, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, in the past year, we've been able to expand our production in the brew house, and that's great. I think this also comes as a technical challenge to us, which is, equally as exciting. We're able to kind of turn our focus into making something that, a cocktail drinker wouldn't turn their nose up at, which is, hard. It's a very hard task, but, it's one that we welcome and one that we think that we're capable of achieving. So, we've got this unused event space that is, too small for anything over 15 people, but, we have the ability and the time and the, idea to turn it into a 15 to 20 seat, cocktail experience that is completely separate from the brewery, that will attract people that, don't necessarily want to drink beer. They can go in there and they can have a tropical cocktail that's, handmade literally 30 feet from where you're sitting. So I think there's kind of a draw there in that regard.
That's awesome. And in terms of the drinks, obviously mixology is a whole separate, kind of field. Are you going to be bringing somebody in to make those? Are you in the process of creating those recipes yourself? How is that portion going to work?
Yeah. So obviously, it's something that we're pursuing. So we will have a little bit of a say in it, but, ideally we are looking to bring someone in. It is a little bit different of a bartending job or a mixologist job than most people would be used to. But, I think, like I said a moment ago, like, it's a technical challenge for anybody that takes it on. So I think it's an interesting challenge. And I think it's one that, if somebody is tired of, like, dealing with cocktail bar customers, which I've worked in restaurants and I've worked, at the brewery, and sometimes there are people that you can be a little unruly. And I can only imagine that that's completely enhanced by liquor. Then, so I think it could be a refreshing break for someone. So, and that's just me speaking from an assumption, and I know that's probably the wrong assumption to make, but I don't know any other way to look at it. Gotcha. Honestly.
So what are the next steps? Obviously, it's not going to be opening just yet, but where are you in the process?
So we've got a couple of construction things that have to take place. So we got to put in a floor drain. We'll put in like a garage door, like above a bar top. So we'll have like an open air section of the building. There's got to be a complete renovation of the room. There's painting that has to go on. There's furniture building. There's all kinds of stuff, but it's not as far off as some people might think, I guess.
Gotcha. I guess, what are you looking at or anticipating in terms of an opening date?
It will be this year. I don't necessarily want to say a specific date, but it will be in 2023.
Cool. I definitely can't wait to check it out and see photos when it opens. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I'll let you get back to building your new cocktail experience, and we'll talk soon.
Hell yeah. Thank you, brother.
So there we go. It's a particularly interesting sounding project. I can't wait to see it finished. I can't wait to see exactly how 80s-rific it's going to be, because I'm sure it's going to be something quite fun. Coming up on the Florida Beer Podcast, we've got a lot of really great episodes coming up. Got some awesome events that we're going to be going to, a lot of breweries that we're going to be speaking with. There's just some great stuff that is coming in. And the best way for you to find out about those new shows when they come online is to subscribe to us on the podcasting app of your choice. We are all over the place. Obviously, we are on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and iHeart and all sorts of fun stuff. If you can, leave us a nice 5-star review. It really does help other people kind of learn a little bit more that we're out there, and hopefully be able to spread the word far and wide about all the crazy things that are going on here in the state of Florida. If you want to get in contact with us, it's pretty simple. Just go to floridabeerblog@gmail.com, drop me a line, and I will respond. Hopefully. We will be back next week with a really cool episode. Don't know quite what it is yet because I've got some interviews that are coming up, but definitely make sure to follow us on social media and like and subscribe to us on the podcasting app of your choice, and you will find out when that happens. Our intro announcer is Jeff Brozovich. Field producer is Steve Pekala. Executive producer and Grand High Poobah for the Florida Podcast Network is Jemmy Legagneur. This is Dave, your host and author. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next week, and drink Florida Craft.